We know the highest rate of conversion occurs in church plants and new starts than existing churches.
Well, and it reminds me of a story a church planter friend of mine told me several years back. He said, I'm much more supportive of bunny rabbit church planting than I am elephant church planting. Right. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, how quickly do elephants reproduce? It's, what is it, 18-month gestation period or something? I mean, it's long. Right. And he said, how quickly do bunnies reproduce? Oh, my soul. I mean, over and over. I mean, he said, but most of the bunnies live. He said, but they're not all huge. Bunnies don't grow to be the size of an elephant. Yep. I would rather have a bunch of bunny churches that have 50, 75 people all across the way reaching out into their communities, having people saved, than I would to have only a few, quote unquote, he called them elephant churches, that don't reproduce that often and aren't reproducing many babies. I'm trying to think of another word, but they're not reproducing much at that point. And to me, that was such a good visual of, but to do that, then we need to have the accountability. We need to, be able to have the metrics, like you said, Jim, to check back and forth. I've had a number of people that I know who have asked, where is that going? Why do we have such a large bank of money that's counted as church planting? And right now, the North American Mission Board is not very accountable. And so they have just like one big heading in the budget that we see that says X number of $1 million, $69 million, whatever. And underneath that, we don't know how much of that is being spent for church planter salary support. How much of that is being spent to buy these houses we know they're buying? How much is that being spent on insurance? How much of that is being spent on, I mean, the list could be long, 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 right? Mm-hmm. And it's my view that Southern Baptists should have some idea how that's being spent. I don't want to see a check register, but I would sure like to see a breakdown of how much of that. The other thing that frustrates me about that is we have had people that I know that have asked, how many church plants do we actually have in our state? Where are those church plants? Joe Westbury did that article several months back where he asked that question and NAM refused to answer it. And when I was the executive director, and this is true for you guys in your states probably too, but when I was executive director, I knew every church planter who was getting NAM funding because we were partnered with the state convention. So the state convention knew that. We knew how much it was. North American Mission Board sent it was a huge check, but they sent a check. X number of dollars were designated for evangelism, so much for church planting, etc., whatever our partnership agreement was at that point. And then we cut a check for $1,000, $1,500, $700, whatever it was, that was sent to each of those planters' support through their partner church usually, but it was for their support. But we knew, okay, since the GCR, NAM has tried to take all that away. They've cut off the partnerships now with our state conventions. Our state conventions don't even know how many church plants are now being funded in their own states. To me, that's a huge problem. We need to have that transparency where we can see, hey, look, how many plants are in my state that you're funding? And not only how many, but wouldn't you like to, and don't you think your people would like to know how much each of those plants are getting? Because if there's 69 million going out the door, those plants ought to be getting 60 something thousand apiece. Right. That's not happening, we're pretty sure. And we know that from some of the testimonies of church planters. But anyway, I've rambled on, but what do you guys think? I mean, we're talking GCR. So this is since GCR, some of this has happened.
Bob, can you go back to some of this, the thought here, and maybe Don and Bert kind of respond to that? But the concept of not knowing who's in your state, why would that even be a reality? Why would that be something to not share? Why would that, what would be an issue there? See, I'm saying that raises so many questions.
That's a great question.
Why?
Well,
yeah.
I was going to kind of play the devil's advocate for a second, and this is not what I agree with, but I can understand how some people can see that makes sense, because I remember explaining to our church how this kind of thing works, and people saying that just seems so inefficient. We send our money to the state. The state takes part of that money, sends it to the SBC. Part of that money goes to NAM, and then part of that money comes back into our state. We're like, that seems just so inefficient. And so streamlining it seems like it would be a better stewardship. But really, when you try to streamline it and try to be more efficient, what do you lose? And it loses accountability and transparency. And that's where we've gotten to where we are. Does that make sense?
I want to go back to you. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'm in the same mindset. If you streamline, I'm going back to not knowing their names.
Right.
That's a totally different issue. Why is it secretive as to who we're supporting? We should be praying for them, excited about them, and we should. And even if you're not receiving funds from the state and they should connect and be willing to share resources. Is this stealth church planning? Are we planning invisible churches? I mean, imagine having people paying for staff position in your church, right? And nobody knows who your youth pastor is. Nobody knows.
Right.
What would go on then? What would happen in your church at that moment?
Truth be told, at least the way NAM's doing it now,
right,
our general population of Southern Baptist church members don't understand what's being produced. In case in point, last year, I got the North American Mission Board calendar, where you flip through and you pray for somebody weekly or daily or whatever. I'm going through there and I'm looking at names and stuff. I know one from Michigan. I'm thinking, what's he in this church planting thing for? And it appeared that this person was a church planter, just by the simple wording. If you don't know that it's kind of the area strategist, it looks like this is your church planter, but this person's been a pastor there for a couple of decades. And so Joe Blow in the pews doesn't have a clue that this is not a church planter. They're praying that God helps this church planter. And
Bert, can you pause the explanation here and go to the specifics here? What are you saying? This guy is a pastor in an existing church and receiving church planting funds?
Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't some of these guys whom I'm talking about, that if they're not getting funds, they're at least helping figure out where funds need to go for some of these area plants?
Yeah, the best I understand, and it's true in multiple states, that NAM has hired guys that are established church pastors, and they bring them on now part-time, call them a church planting catalyst or strategist or something of that sort. CPC is what we were calling them at the time by them. And so they are supplementing their income, even though they're in a church plant, and they are supposed to be helping to catalyze other churches. I don't know how many that has gone to, and if that strategy is still in place. I know that there were a number of guys that I was aware of that had begun to get kind of catalyst funds to do that, and I wasn't seeing in their areas, more church plants starting at that point. But again, that goes back to transparency,
right?
Because that could, if that's, maybe I'm misrepresenting that. I mean, I'll totally be glad to be corrected if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm misrepresenting that. But if we had transparency, we could see that, we could know that, and I'm not sure who Bert's talking to specifically, and he don't want to call the name, but that it could be a pastor who's been a pastor for 20 something years that they brought in or something, to do that. It's just hard to know without the transparency. Yeah,
and they're basically doing what guys at the state conventions and the local associations used to do,
or not doing it, or not doing it. You mean they could be getting paid? Like I am aware of that too. People who should have been off the church planting dole, and their church isn't quite making it. Making it being self-sustaining, and all of a sudden there's still funds going their way, and there's not catalytic church planting going on. There's not this great resources, and also I'm looking at it going, have they grown their church at all? And I'm not seeing church growth in these people's their background. They're not experienced. They happen to have a certain theological bent, I've noticed, a certain narrow theological bent that seemed to be in line with some people. But that's not, I mean, preach Jesus, Southern Baptist overall doctrine, that's what we're looking for. But it seems odd to me. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm pretty certain that what I observed in a couple places, that is what happened in 2 places. That they may be the anomaly, but hearing that and seeing this is concerning, because we're either, that's fine. You want to help a church out, call it church renewal. Don't call it church planting. Be honest about what we do, because if we have less church plants now, right? But of that number, there's a bigger percentage of existing churches being funded as church plants. That's even less church plants than what we've had before. That would be very concerning to me. I don't know this for absolute fact, but hearing you guys talk and seeing these numbers, I'm getting more concerned than ever before.